Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kristen Hentz, and I'm the Assistant Director of Capital Development at the LA County Department of Economic Opportunity. I'm so happy to be here with our partner Genesis LA to share more about the Commercial Acquisition Fund and the Phase 1 application process. The CAF was created to help local communities take a more active role in shaping the future of their neighborhoods. And this is the second cycle of this program, and we're so excited to be expanding the offerings that we're able to deliver through this program. Through CAF, we're looking to invest in acquisition and revitalization of commercial properties that can become long-term assets for small businesses, nonprofits, cultural organizations, entrepreneurs, and developers looking to build affordable housing and maintain vibrant local communities. And so our broader goal is to really activate commercial corridors and storefronts, create the opportunity for additional local jobs, cultural identity, and spaces that really reflect and serve the people who live in those communities. We know that so many communities across LA County are facing vacancy and displacement pressures from underinvestment, and CAF is really designed to help reverse some of that, those occurrences in commercial corridors and support projects that bring life and opportunity and economic stability back to neighborhoods. And so in today's session, we're going to walk you through the Phase 1 application process, answer some questions at the end. We'll be picking up questions that are in the Q&A box, and hopefully just give you all a little bit more insight into the program and what the eligibility requirements and what we are hoping to achieve through this effort. I also wanted to say that some of you may have attended the in-person session a couple of weeks ago. Some of the information may be repetitive, but some will also be new. And we just want to create as many opportunities for folks to learn about this program in different mediums, in person and virtually, and are also happy to answer questions that you may have throughout the application process. So also not here with us today is Amina Hassan. She's a program manager on my team. And if you reach out to us or to Genesis, you may come across her as well. So just wanted to flag her and all the work that she's done on this. And I'll pass it over to Sarah.
Great. Tom, if you want to kick off the introduction and then.
Sure. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I'm Tom DeSimone with Genesis LA, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Sarah, Darnell, and Zubia, who've put a tremendous amount of effort into getting us to this point, and we'll be working on this program going forward. Genesis LA is a nonprofit community loan fund, also called a CDFI, and we provide capital to community development and economic development projects throughout Los Angeles County. We worked with the Department of Economic Opportunity on round 1 of CAF, where we helped support 7 projects throughout the county. And we're honored to be able to serve in a similar role on CAF 2, which you'll be hearing more about today. We're helping the county to design the opportunity, help to disseminate information, design a review process, and ultimately select top candidates and help them through some technical assistance to put strong projects forward ultimately for competitive funding. So thank you for joining us, and we look forward to working with you. I'll hand it back to you, Sarah.
Thanks, and great to meet everyone. Sarah Harris, Director of Strategic Initiatives at Genesis LA, and helping to work on this CAF Fund program with DEO. So now I will get into the material. So as Kristen kind of provided an overview, we're going to be doing an overview of the fund and its eligibility requirements, then getting into the application itself, since I know there's a lot of questions around the Phase 1 application. We'll have some time for Q&A, and then we'll talk about next steps briefly. So the CAF fund provides forgivable loans to eligible applicants to purchase vacant, abandoned, under-leased, or underutilized properties, with the goal of restoring them into community-serving commercial uses. So as Kristen kind of spoke to, this goal is to revitalize commercial corridors, help reduce small business displacement, and promote equitable economic development across the county. It is anticipated that at least one project will be awarded in each of the 5 supervisorial districts, and we'll get more into the weeds of what that means as we talk about the application. And right now, given the funding levels we have, each project may receive a loan of up to $340,000. And this is the acquisition forgivable loan that we're talking about. Projects in Supervisorial District 2 may be eligible for an additional $1 million. So projects in the second district may have 1.34 million in acquisition funds. That's the maximum they could receive. And final award amounts are all subject to the county's discretion and funding availability. So you won't know the details of your funding level until you're later into the process in phase 2 and you're selected as an awardee. So now we're going to talk about who we fund, and this is really important because it is about the eligibility requirements of who can apply. And there's 3 types of entities that are qualified to apply for CAF. One is small businesses, another is nonprofit organizations, and a third is small-scale developers. And there's an asterisk because medium to large-scale developers can apply if they're part of a team with one of the 3 eligible entities, which we'll get into later on as well. So our definition of small businesses is a for-profit entity that is independently owned and operated. It's 16 million or less in average gross annual revenue receipts in the most recent 3 years, and 100 employees or fewer. And there are some exclusions, including subsidiaries of large corporations, shell companies, and any entities created solely for the loan award purposes. Our definition of nonprofit organizations is active nonprofits with legal standing, and this can include community development corporations and community land trusts. And they must be in active standing with articles of incorporation, bylaws, and a chart of entities and affiliates, which we'll ask for that information if you proceed to phase 2. And the third type is small-scale developers. So this is defined as a real estate development entity with a background in commercial or mixed-use projects, independently owned and operated with a cumulative development volume of 50 million or less over the past 5 years, and currently owns no more than 5 income-producing properties. And again, we'll talk about this more, but medium to large scale developers will be considered if they're partnering with one of the 3 eligible entity types. And the definition of medium to large scale developers is developers that exceed these requirements. So they have a development volume over 50 million, they've completed or own more than 5 properties or projects, and this is all listed in the application as well, these definitions. So now we're going to talk briefly about what and where we fund and what's eligible for this program. So talking about what we fund, the CAF funds can go towards 3 types of properties that are eligible for acquisition. So the first type is a vacant or abandoned property. This has been unoccupied for 2+ years. This includes vacant land or properties with vacant or abandoned structures. The second type is an under lease property. So this is a property that had an average vacancy rate of 30 to 50% the prior year. And then an underutilized property is the third type, which is a property that has not been built to the maximum development potential. And the thinking behind these property types is really to achieve the goals of the CAF program, which is to revitalize communities and activate vacant and blighted commercial spaces. All the properties must also be zoned for commercial use. Now looking at where we fund, so the CAF fund will give funding to acquisitions across LA County. So you have to be within LA County's jurisdiction. And this is a map, it's on the website, of the 5 LA County supervisorial districts. And in the application and on the website, you'll be directed to a link where you can look up certain addresses and identify where they fall within these 5 districts. But we are trying to have a mix of projects across the 5 districts. So you'll be asked about that in your application. And then the last piece is that the county is giving preference to projects located along specific commercial corridors where the county is actively planning and investing in revitalization efforts. And we'll show you the list of those corridors later on. Lastly, to get into funding conditions. So because the county is giving funding for this program and for this work, there are specific community restrictions on the awardee and every successive property owner for a period of 30 years. And these restrictions are to make sure that the acquisition and the revitalization has positive community impacts for the local neighborhood, given that this is public investment. So the 5 covenants are the property owner must lease commercial space to tenants that provide community serving uses for the neighborhood, including at least 51% to small businesses. The property owner must provide temporary relocation and first right of return to existing tenants during renovations. The property owner must renovate and rehabilitate the acquired property. The property owner must provide below market rent to eventual commercial tenants. And then there may be additional requirements for provision of affordable housing in the case of redevelopment, mixed-use projects where someone's acquiring a property and building both housing and commercial space. And to confirm, so the covenant will run with the land. So the person who is acquiring the property must meet these requirements, but even if they sell the property for a period of 30 years, the owner will have to meet these requirements.
Sarah, I just also wanted to know in the chat, there's a question to slow down for the interpreters.
Oh, thank you. One other piece that I'll add is that properties can be owner occupied if they meet all property covenant restrictions. And we'll talk about that more in the application as well. Now to get into the application process and the overall kind of CAF program process. So CAF uses a 2-phase application process. The first phase is where we are now in the phase 1 application, which is a pre-qualification application. It's open to all eligible applicants. And in this phase, you'll submit organizational background information and a proposed project vision. And then there's a second phase. So after phase 1, when all eligible applicants apply, they will then hear back from the county if they're selected to proceed to phase 2. And this is when applicants will submit a more detailed full application. They'll identify a target property, they'll refine their project proposal, they'll solidify their financing plan, and then they'll provide additional details on their organizational information as well. To go through the timeline in a bit more detail, we're at step 2 right now. So there was an info session and some initial applicant preparation. Now we're at the pre-qualification application submission. It opened on May 5th and it's due on June 30th. Then there'll be 6 to 8 weeks of eligibility screening where we will be reviewing your applications. And then the applicants that are selected for phase 2 will be notified by mid-August. For phase 2, there's going to be technical assistance provided to refine your project proposal. And then those proposals will be submitted in the fall of 2026 with conditional awards coming 4 to 6 weeks later. And then the acquisitions will be completed by winter 2026, late 2026, and early 2027. So that was an overview of the overall fund and the timeline. And now we're transitioning to go deeper into the application itself, the phase 1 application, which is available on our website now. When we look at the application and you open the application, it will show these instructions to start. So the application is due by June 30th at 11:59 p.m. Pacific time. To apply, applicants will need contact information for the person managing the application, basic organizational and financial information, a proposed project vision, information about past real estate and community development experience. And if applying as a team, you need this information for both entities, which we'll get into in the future slides as well. So here are the instructions of how to apply as a team. Applicants can apply as one organization or 2 organizations. The maximum is 2 organizations. And if you apply as a team of 2 organizations, you have to designate a lead applicant and a secondary applicant. So the lead applicant has the primary responsibility for the application. They have to meet all of the requirements. They're the main point of contact, and they must be one of the 3 eligible CAF entity types that we just discussed. So a small business, a nonprofit, or a small scale developer. The secondary applicant is an optional partner that applies with the lead applicant and provides complementary capabilities and expertise. So they share responsibility for project planning and implementation. They also have to meet all application requirements unless otherwise stated. And they must be one of the 3 eligible entity types or a medium or large scale developer. So as we think about applying as a team and the way that we design this, we want the lead applicant to be in charge and be responsible for the application, but the secondary applicant can be someone who's providing additional capacity, relationships, expertise that's needed to make your project competitive and that would make you more successful if you're selected as an awardee. One thing to flag is that teams do not need to form a new legal entity at the time of the phase 1 application. But if you are awarded, if teams are selected and awarded, they do need to create that combined legal entity, so an LLC that combines the 2 entities to borrow the CAF funds. So when you apply, if you're applying as a team, no legal entity needs to be created at this point. So the first section of the application asks about organizational and financial information. And this is really general information for us to get to know your organizations. And if you're applying as a team, each entity should answer these questions individually. So if you look at the application, you'll see the first section says lead applicant, and then there's an optional secondary applicant section for those applying as a team. And we'll ask about your teaming approach. Are you applying as one entity or a team of 2 entities? We'll ask your primary contact information and the organizational background information. So the application asks for you to explain your business model, the years that you've been operational, number of employees. It'll ask for your website, really foundational information. This section also asks about eligibility criteria. So this is really important. Applicants must certify that they meet all minimum eligibility criteria or they will be disqualified. So this is the list of eligibility criteria that the application asks for. And we clarify in the application, you need to say yes to these questions to be eligible to apply. I will say that there is an optional open response question where you can explain if you did not answer yes to these questions, why, and we will review it and consider exceptions if there are kind of distinct scenarios that make someone not necessarily fit these boxes, but generally still eligible to apply. And so to go through the eligibility criteria, the lead applicant must be one of the 3 eligible entity types, and the secondary applicant must be one of the 3 eligible entity types or a medium to large scale developer. The applicant must be incorporated as a business or nonprofit and registered to do business or as a nonprofit in the state of California. The applicant must have operated in Los Angeles County for the past 3 years. They must remain in good legal standing, free of governmental entity disbarment, and free of any unresolved violations noted in the county's contracting database. And lastly, they must certify that they're able to provide the required documentation if invited to submit a phase 2 application. And the required documentation is listed in the application. The last part of this section asks about financial information for your organization. So you'll be asked what your most recent fiscal year budget is and whether you had a positive net income or a positive change in net assets in each of the past 3 years. And if not, explain why this has not been the case. And then we'll ask some questions about your financial readiness and experience. So whether you've borrowed a loan to acquire, improve, or build real estate, whether you've borrowed a loan to grow your business or organization, and whether you've raised capital or grants to grow your business or organization. That's the end of the applicant information section. And then we move on to the project vision section. And starting with this section and for the rest of the application, you no longer, if you're applying as a team, you answer all of these questions together. You no longer answer as individual organizations. And this is all specified in the application. So this section asks you to articulate your proposed project vision, and the applicant should answer these questions collectively based on the shared project vision of both entities if applying as a team. And we'll get into the weeds of what this means, but just really want to emphasize we are not expecting folks to have a property necessarily identified or their entire project fleshed out in detail. But what we are asking is for you to articulate what you're trying to do, to think through what the scope and the scale of what you're trying to do is, what tenants you're hoping to have in the commercial spaces, and what the impacts of your proposed project would be on the local neighborhood. And I'll get into the details of what this asks. So in this section, we'll ask about your priority locations. We'll ask you to rank the LA County supervisorial districts in order of preference. So there's 5 districts, as we discussed earlier, and you'll have to rank where you would like to acquire property within, where your priority districts are, from 1 to 5. And then in the narrative response, there's an opportunity for you to explain why you selected these priority supervisorial districts and if there are any specific neighborhoods you are targeting. We will also ask applicants whether they're seeking to acquire property on or near any of the following priority corridors where the county is actively planning and investing in revitalization efforts. And there will be some preference in the application scoring process given if applicants choose to prioritize any of these corridors. So this list is on the LA County CAF website, and it's also in the application. And the application will ask you to check which of these corridors you're interested in, if any at all. You don't have to answer yes to any of these corridors. The application will also ask about your proposed project type. And one thing we wanted to clarify is that we see kind of 3 main project types. And these are example images from CAF Cycle 1 to give you kind of a flavor of what this can look like. So in terms of your project type, you may be looking at a property that's move-in ready and only requires small scale tenant improvements. You may be looking at a property that will require more deeper rehabilitation, or you may be looking to do new construction and either knock down an existing building or build from a vacant property. But these are kind of the 3 types that you should be thinking about as you're designing your project vision and thinking about what you want to take on based on your capacity. So if you have no development experience, taking on new construction is not the best fit for this program. And we want you to think through how your project type aligns with your experience and capacity. And you'll also have to select whether you want to do a commercial or a mixed use project. So are you planning on looking for properties to do only commercial spaces with, or are you looking to do something with residential above and commercial below? And for each project type, there will be a development scope associated with this, and you'll describe this development scope in the questions in the application. So if you choose a move-in ready property, you should be describing that you will have likely limited tenant improvements, you'll need limited additional financing. If you are hoping to go more of the deeper rehabilitation route, we're envisioning that this will require extensive renovations. You may need to secure significant additional financing. And then for new construction, similarly, a ground-up construction project will require significant additional financing. And it also requires more extensive real estate development experience. So these are kind of the 3 archetypes we see that your project could fit into. And in your project vision narrative response, we're asking you to clarify what type of project you're hoping to execute on. And we really want you to think through what you're prepared to do. Even if you don't have the exact property, this should inform how you're looking for future properties, which of these three categories you fit into. We'll also ask about your tenant plan and project impacts. So one question asks, do you seek a property that's fully owner occupied? So this means that when you acquire the property, you will be the only tenant occupying the building. There's another model where you may be a tenant and then leasing to third-party tenants as well. And then there's a third model where you would be fully leasing to third-party tenants and you would just be the owner. So that's another choice for you to think through as you're designing your project vision. Which of these three buckets do you fit into, and how does your past experience and your vision align to this goal? We'll also ask you to describe the types of uses. So are you looking to do retail? Are you looking to do a restaurant? And whether a potential tenant is identified, this is not required, but we are asking for you to think through what types of tenants you want in the space. And if you have ideas of who that might be and why it would have an impact on the local community. And then we ask about your potential impacts of the proposed project. So how many community serving commercial spaces are you aiming to create? How many units? How many of jobs would you be creating with this project? For example, say you're doing a food hall and you're going to have 8 commercial tenants, small business vendors. Maybe each one would have a couple employees. You would have 16 to 20 new jobs created from that food hall vision. That's the type of vision. We're not holding you to these commitments, but we're asking you to think through what you're seeking to do and the impact it could have. And one thing I really want to emphasize is that the tenant plan must align with the CAF restrictions. So as we discussed previously, you have to lease all commercial space to community serving goods and services for the neighborhood, to tenants that provide community serving goods and services to the neighborhood. And at least 51% of the commercial square footage must be leased to small businesses. So this means if you're a nonprofit organization, you have to lease at least 51% of commercial space to small businesses. You cannot be entirely an owner-occupied property because then you do not meet this requirement. And we will be checking to see if your tenant plan aligns with these requirements. We also ask a question about your leasing approach. And this is for you to think through how you would identify the tenants for your project, even if you don't have them identified yet, which we assume most people will not have them identified. But it's for you to explain how you would seek to find them and ensure that they meet the requirements and how you would engage local stakeholders. So for this question, you may say, I am a nonprofit and I work with this Chamber of Commerce in this neighborhood, and I will work with them to identify these small businesses. Or I am a small business and I have a couple other small businesses that I know that would want to be in my property with me. So thinking through how you would identify these tenants and how you would execute your tenant plan. And this is really about your approach. This section also asks you to describe your acquisition budget and financing plan. So we will ask, what is your estimated acquisition cost for this project? And I really want to emphasize here, we understand people do not have properties identified. So we're asking you to give an estimate and then to reference any initial research you conducted that informed this estimate. So research could look like reviewing comparable properties. Say you want to get a property in a specific neighborhood. Say you're looking at West Adams. You should be looking at similar properties that have sold in West Adams and referencing those comps to inform your estimate. You could also talk to a real estate professional, like a broker, or you could just do research on your own around recent property sales, average price per square footage, average sales price per square footage in the neighborhood. And just to emphasize again, we're not vetting this for like consistency. It's not like you have to stick to this estimate, but really we're vetting this for, have you done your research? Are you thinking about your project plan and what the acquisition cost could look like? And is this data informed? And then we'll also ask your plans for securing additional capital needed to complete the CAF project acquisition. So say your estimated acquisition cost is 1 million, assuming the maximum is around 350, 300,000. How are you going to close that gap? Do you have cash internally in your business or nonprofit? Is there a lender that you've worked with previously that you think would lend to this project? Is there equity you're hoping to raise? So we'll ask you to explain the potential capital provider, the type of financing, and the status of that financing. Do you already have 500,000 that you've been saving for an acquisition that is in hand in your business? Or have you been approved for another financing source already? And lastly, is this a financing source that you're hoping to acquire but has not yet been approved? So we'll ask about the capital provider, the type of financing, and the status of that financing. We ask very similar questions about the improvements budget. So this is for you to think through the estimated cost of tenant improvements, rehabilitation, or new construction. Again, this is truly an initial estimate. We know that these estimates could really change depending on the condition of the property that you end up finding and selecting if you are selected. But we're asking you to think through what this could look like. So what would a standard tenant improvement cost if you're looking to build a restaurant? That's something you could research. Okay, what is the square footage, cost per square footage for building a restaurant if you're looking for a space of X square footage? So you really want to think through, okay, what is the general size I'm looking for? And then what would be the cost to complete my project? And this also goes back to the 3 project types. So if your budget is focused on tenant improvements, it may be under $1 million. If your budget's focused on rehabilitation, it may be a larger budget depending on kind of the depths of rehabilitation that you're envisioning you would have to do. And then new construction would be multi-millions, likely multi-millions, depending on kind of what you're seeking to do. But if you're, for example, if you're planning to build an affordable housing project with ground floor commercial, we want to see that your new construction budget really aligns to that goal. And again, this is much more about referencing your research and your thinking than it is about getting to this perfect number. We want you to have an estimate, and we say that you can put a range. So you could say, I'm estimating my tenant improvements will be 200,000 to 400,000, and this is why. That's really what we're asking for. And then we also similarly ask about your plans for securing additional capital, because when we're selecting applicants, we want to make sure that their project is successful, and we know that we can only give the acquisition funding. So we want you to think through, how are you going to fund the rest of this? Are there capital sources that you have secured or that you could realistically envision securing to do this? An SBA loan is one potential capital source that other past applicants have used, past awardees have used to complete their renovations. So that's the end of the project vision section. And then we move on to real estate experience. So this section asks about the applicant's experience with acquiring, rehabilitating, and building or operating a commercial or mixed-use project, and their approach to teaming, if applicable. And if you're applying as a team, the applicant should answer these questions collectively based on the combined experience of both entities. So if you're applying as a team, we're letting you kind of leverage the past experience of both organizations to inform your application. So this is a series of yes/no questions in the application that will ask about the applicant's real estate experience within the past 10 years. So we'll ask if you've ever acquired a property and if commercial space was included, if yes. We'll ask if you've ever done tenant improvements on a building. And this may apply to whether you've owned a building or if you've been a tenant and done tenant improvements of any kind. We'll ask if you've rehabilitated a building, and if so, was commercial space included? We'll ask if you've done new construction of a development project, and if so, was commercial space included? We'll ask if you've ever owned or managed a property that had active tenants for at least 12 months, and if commercial tenants were included. And then we'll ask if you've been a tenant with a commercial lease for 5 years or longer. And this is really to make sure that everyone can leverage their real estate experience, whether you've been a tenant or an owner previously. And then there's a few open response questions in this section. And this question will ask about your current staffing capacity to take on a real estate acquisition, as well as tenant improvements, rehabilitation, or a new construction project. And the thing to really emphasize with this question is that it should tie to how your current staffing experience is relevant to your proposed CAF project. So if you're saying, I have a staff member who has managed a commercial rehabilitation before, that's why I feel equipped to take this on. Or, I'm partnering with a developer because I want to do new construction and my organization has never done new construction, but this developer is going to be the secondary applicant and they're going to work with me on this project. Or if you're an applicant that's applying alone with very little real estate experience, you should explain, okay, I've been a tenant for a long time. I've managed some small tenant improvements, and that's why I'm buying or I'm seeking to buy a property that requires a small level of tenant improvements for me to move my business or nonprofit into. And then the last question of this section asks, if you're applying as a team, what is the nature of your proposed partnership? So why have you decided to partner? Do you have complementary expertise or capacities? How do you plan to work together? So what roles will you each play? And then if you have worked together, in what capacity and for how long? And again, that's an optional question for only if you're applying as a team. The last section is about your community development background. And again, the applicant should answer these questions based on the combined experience of both entities. So this is just one section. If you're applying as a team, this is just one response. And the two questions, the first one asks about your work or relationships in the neighborhood where you're seeking to acquire property. So at this point, you have identified your priority supervisorial districts. You've checked which corridors you may be interested in. And in your project vision narrative, you've elaborated on whether there are particular neighborhoods you're hoping to work in. And so this question asks you, what are your connections to these areas? Have you worked in these neighborhoods before and for how many years? Maybe you've been a business on this corridor for 10 years. Do you have relationships with local stakeholders? Have you worked with other small businesses on the corridor or nonprofits or resident groups? And do you have any other experiences in these areas? So have you led organizing activities or provided services or been part of an association? And then the second question asks about your overall experience with community or economic development activities. So outside of real estate development, what work have you done? This is less tied to a specific place, but more just about, have you ever supported small businesses? Have you ever organized neighborhood events? Have you ever participated in community planning activities? So really just to describe your experience in this arena. And this is especially relevant if you're a nonprofit because you're going to have to lease 51% of your space to small businesses. And so we really want to understand what experience you have working with small businesses, recruiting tenants, supporting them, or doing kind of broader community development work. That is the end of the application section. I'll pause before getting into the evaluation criteria. One piece I want to emphasize is that the application needs to be fully completed. So there are some optional questions that say, like, if yes, answer this. But most questions are completely required, and we cannot fairly evaluate your application if it's not fully completed. And so make sure you kind of go through each section in detail and provide an answer. Even if you don't have a super long answer, provide an answer to every question. We will now transition to speak briefly about evaluation criteria. So the phase one application will assess applicants by considering the following key criteria. So there's 5 categories we're looking at. The primary criteria will be weighted more heavily than the secondary criteria. And I'll go through each criteria briefly. So the first one is your project vision. And when we're looking at your responses to these questions, we're looking at their coherence across different components of your project vision. So there's the proposed project type, the development scope, the tenant plan, and the leasing approach. So as we're looking at your project vision, we're thinking, okay, say that you want to do a large mixed-use project with residential above and commercial below, but you're only planning to have one tenant on the ground floor. That's not coherent. That doesn't match. Or say you want to do a build out that's ready to go, will have really minor tenant improvements on a commercial property, but you're saying you want to build a large restaurant that will require a lot of rehabilitation and expensive renovations. That doesn't match. So we really want to make sure your goals and your development scope and your tenant plan all match, and what you're talking about is clear and coherent. And then we're going to look at your budget estimates and your financing plans and really make sure there's substantiation of the numbers that you're sharing. Again, these don't have to be perfectly accurate. We understand it may vary depending on the property you find, but we want you to have thought through these estimates. And then we're going to look at the proposed impact of the project, the potential impact. So how many businesses would you be providing space for? What types of services and goods would you be bringing to the neighborhood? And how is this impact compelling and clear? So that's the project vision criteria. The second primary criteria we're looking at is the alignment between the applicant's capacity and the project vision. So in the application, you'll be sharing about your capacity, your past real estate experiences, your current staffing capacity, your financial readiness and experience with financing. And we're going to look at that, and then we're going to look at what your proposed project vision is, so what you're trying to do, and see if those match. Is it feasible? So this is going back to kind of the project types we talked about earlier. If you have no experience with development, a new construction project is not going to be super aligned with your experience, but a small tenant improvement project would be. If your team has done kind of meaningful tenant improvements before, you may be ready to take on a rehab scope of some medium scale. And we want to make sure that we're looking at your staffing capacity and your real estate experience to make sure that you would be equipped to do this. And this is really to make sure that we're selecting applicants and projects that are successful. So it's really important to think through the scope you're seeking to pursue and then what your experience is. And then the other 3 criteria that are secondary criteria, one is around priority locations. So whether you're interested in properties near the county's prioritized commercial corridors. The second one is around financial health. Those are kind of the questions earlier on in the application, asking about your budget, asking about your net income, and whether you're ready to own, improve, and operate a commercial or mixed-use project. And then the last criteria is around the community development background. So what are your past experiences with economic and community development? What are your connections to the neighborhood? That will impact your score as well. That is the end of our application overview. One thing just to flag before we get into Q&A is that we are going to be releasing an FAQs document, and that will also include a bit more detail on these criteria and how we're approaching scoring for the application. And we know that folks have sent in questions and they've shared questions in the chat today. We're not going to get to all of them today, but we're tracking them all for the FAQ document. And folks have also submitted questions when we were at the info session a couple weeks ago. we're tracking all these questions. We're going to be releasing an FAQ document that touches on every question that's been submitted. One thing I want to flag is that there have been a lot of questions around property type and whether a specific property type is eligible. And we're going to answer those to the best of our ability at this stage. But I want to emphasize that for the phase one application, it's not super focused on property type. So it's much more about the vision, the scope of what you're trying to do. Is it kind of a smaller scope or a bigger scope? And your applicant background and your experience. That's what phase one application is focused on. When we get to phase two, that's when, if you're selected, we'll dig a lot deeper into the property and the project proposal and making sure that it aligns with all of our requirements and all of the goals for the program and making sure that it's an impactful project. So just so you know, we're happy to answer some of these initial questions, but the property type is less emphasized in this phase. I will pause before we go to Q&A. Is there anything for folks that have been monitoring the Q&A box or the chat? Is there anything Kristen, Tom, or anyone wants to share before we just open up to Darnell to share some questions? Okay, looks like we're ready. So Darnell is going to, maybe you can read the question and then me, Kristen, and Tom can try to answer it. And if we don't have an answer, we will be tracking it for the FAQs.
Sure. The question we saw was, is rezoning allowed after the acquisition?
No, the property is supposed to be zoned for its intended use at the time that you acquire it.
Another question we had is, how is below market rent defined and calculated? Who determines this, and how often is it updated? Can it still increase a percentage each year?
Great question. At the time of the acquisition, we as administrators of the program will order an appraisal as part of that acquisition. And in that appraisal, there'll be an analysis of what market rents are for the property, given its comparability to other properties. And that market rent will be set as the ceiling that you need to be under to be affordable. It just needs to be under. And you are allowed the standard cost of living increases kind of per the CPI index in the county. And there's a formula in the covenant that describes that.
Another question, if existing tenant exercises its first right of return, do they return at the newly established rent or their previous rent?
That's a good question. I don't think we encountered that on the first one, so we'll get back to you after we consult with the county.
Can an eligible entity apply as a lead applicant for more than one project? What about as a secondary applicant?
No, I think, Kristen and Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you can only apply for one project. I'm not sure about the secondary applicant question.
I think I would maybe answer that slightly different in that I think if you're proposing multiple different project types and you have a strong vision for them, you can submit those as a lead applicant. However, we would not grant an award to a single party for multiple different project types. And then as the lead applicant, as a secondary applicant, I believe you are eligible to submit as a secondary applicant for multiple projects, and they don't necessarily need to be with, or they don't need to be with the same lead applicant. That particularly comes to mind for the small and medium developers. We know that there are not just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of developers out there, and so there may be some of the larger mixed-use development companies that are going to join with small businesses, nonprofits, small-scale developers as secondary applicants, potentially on multiple proposals.
Okay, that's clarifying. So just to confirm, yes, the answer is yes. You can apply. You can submit more than one application as a lead applicant if your project vision, if you have more than one project vision, and you can apply more than one time as a secondary applicant.
But we will not be awarding
Yes.
to the same organization on multiple fronts. Yes.
Yeah, you will not be awarded for the months.
Another question is, do we have full discretion in selecting tenants, assuming they meet the criteria, or do tenants need program approval?
The property owner has that discretion as long as the tenants are compliant with the covenant's requirements, meaning the small business and the rent levels, etc.
Is the 3-year rule a hard limit, or do you fund newer organizations sometimes?
I would say that the 3-year is a hard limit. And it's 3 years operating within LA County. I do understand there's some newer folks. We do hope that this fund continues on an annual or biannual basis, and we're able to get additional funds to continue running this. So in the future, there's other opportunities if folks are newer. Specifically, the requirement around LA County is that we do want this to be focused around folks that have been in LA County, committed to seeing small business and the sort of commercial resurgence here. And so we do have that requirement to sort of limit folks coming in from other locations and just starting to launch their business in LA County through this program.
Okay. Is the 51% based on square footage or a number of leases? I believe he's talking about the small businesses.
Square
They're
foot.
talking.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, square footage, just in case that was mumbled from the multiple voices, but it's the total square footage of the space and 51% of it.
Another question, where does the additional funding come from? Assuming this is related to funding the subsequent phases of the project.
Yeah, so that is something that the applicant needs to consider. The program itself does not provide more than the amounts described in the application. And given the cost of real estate in LA County, we do expect many projects will likely need other dollars. And so that's where the application asks some questions about your experience with this, your plans for this, any research you've done, any potential sources. And that could include other grants you've raised, loans you've raised, partners who have capital. But we do expect that would be needed, and we expect that you'll be able to speak to some strategies about how you would source that.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be secured at this point, but we want you to explain how you would realistically secure it and think through that. And that should also inform the size and scale of the project you're pursuing.
Okay. Another question, seems like nonprofits will have to become landlords to benefit from this. What is the purpose of the requirement to rent half the space out?
Kristen, do you want to elaborate?
Yeah,
I'm happy to
I'm
if not.
happy to, yeah.
So this program is specifically geared towards supporting the revitalization of commercial corridors. And so we are looking for the opportunities to extend to small businesses that are looking to launch and to grow their businesses in LA County. And so nonprofits, the initial idea around the nonprofit organizations here were nonprofits that were geared more into the development space. And we're typically operating in the real estate development landscape, either as existing landlords, as community development corporations, and so folks that were sort of either developing or renting out spaces. It is still open to nonprofits that are more service oriented, or that maybe don't even necessarily have public facing services, where folks would sort of be coming in and out regularly. And so that is an opportunity. You do have the opportunity to apply so long as it's in collaboration with small businesses or a development proposal that is aimed at sort of being that open door on our sort of commercial main streets as a means to revitalizing the retail and commercial lens of the street and the corridor.
Yeah. So that's why we ask about economic development experience, even if you haven't done real estate. Have you ever worked with small businesses? Do you have the these types of experiences around activating commercial spaces or serving in a community development function? And if not, kind of how would you approach that? Are there partners you would work with? Because that really is the mission of this program, is the economic development goal of these corridors.
Uh, is this a loan or a grant? What are the terms of this finance?
It is a loan, but it is forgiven over 10 years. And that is based off of operating performance. So the beginning year of forgiveness is the first full year of operating activities. So for example, if you buy a piece of land that you're going to develop and it takes 3 years to develop that land and put businesses and tenants in, the starting of the forgiveness would start after the 3 year mark and go for 10 years thereafter. So it's based off of delivery of the space to the businesses and tenants.
Okay. How can people look for partners with more experience in real estate/community development before phase one's due date? Will the county consider partnering certain applications up after phase one if it seems like a strong potential match?
It's a great question. We are looking at ways that we may be able to publicize people that are interested in partnering. We're exploring that. The goal of our recent info session a couple weeks ago was also focused on helping people network and meet each other. So we're exploring ways that we could facilitate those connections. We do not plan to, on the back end, connect people after they've submitted their applications. But we're thinking about ways to, yeah, share the names of folks that are interested. Any other ideas, Kristen and Tom?
No, yeah, we do have to be sensitive with folks' information. So we're just looking at
Yeah.
ways to have an opt-in option if you're interested in finding out if you're interested in sharing your information so that folks can find you and connect with you for opportunities for partnering.
Can we apply for more funding in more than one district?
The application gives you the opportunity to select more than one district. So I believe it's a ranking order
Yeah.
by interest. And so at this phase, we're not going to be necessarily selecting the specific location. So showing which areas you're interested in will sort of apply to your vision as a whole.
Yeah, confirming its ranking. So you can you'll be asked to rank all 5.
Are studios and galleries considered small businesses?
I think so. If there's commercial activity, if the artist produces goods, if they sell goods out of the space, it is a form of business.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it depends on
But
your
I mean, yeah,
incorporation. If you're registered as a small business as opposed to a nonprofit.
yeah, just based on the criteria listed.
What if we're already tenants in a building that we're trying to buy?
I think that it might be helpful to know a little bit more about the situation. But if you are a business and you can meet the 51% occupancy as a small business, let's say you are the business, or maybe there's other businesses in there as well, and you can meet the other criteria. I think Sarah shared at the beginning about underutilized or underleased requirements. Theoretically, it could be a candidate. And then your business also, if you're the buyer and you're the applicant, meets the applicant requirements.
Yeah, we are looking for this kind of revitalization activation goal. So we'll want some articulation of whether it's under lease and you're hoping to fill some of the vacancies, or whether it's underutilized and there's things you would want to do with the property once you bought it.
Is it possible this funding will be offered next year?
It is possible, and that is our hope to continue to offer this regularly.
You mentioned mixed-use properties in the presentation, but then said it must be commercial properties only and not rezoned. So is housing not allowed?
Yeah, so it has to be zoned to allow for a commercial use, but some properties allow for mixed use, or some sites allow for mixed use properties. So you are allowed to do housing above, commercial below. It just, the baseline criteria is that it at least has to allow for commercial. If it allows for both, that's eligible as well.
Yeah, and we do that just because this is not limited to LA County. And so all of the various 88 cities plus the county have different zoning designations. So like Sarah said, what might be zoned for mixed use as a separate zoning category in one city or the county might be different from how it's designated in another. So as long as there is a commercial use allowance.
Can you propose more than one property?
Yes. Yeah, we ask if you have a property identified to name, this is an optional question. If you have a property identified, if yes, describe the address, conditions, but that's more just to get the context. We're not at this point, as I shared, vetting in the weeds of each property. It's much more about the vision. So if you have a couple properties that fit your vision, you can speak to that.
Okay. Can the secondary applicant, a small-scale developer, in a team act as the main application point of contact if the primary applicant, a small business, is more established in a target community but has less capacity to run the project?
I think whoever it wants to be the primary applicant, if you're a small developer, you would qualify as the lead applicant. And so I think whoever is ready to be the primary contact should be the lead applicant. If so in that case, the small developer could be the lead applicant and the small business could be the secondary applicant. And that's totally fine if the lead applicant has the development capacity, and then the secondary applicant has the connections to the neighborhood and the location and would maybe serve as the tenant. It's not like the lead applicant has to be the tenant and the secondary applicant can't be the tenant.
Can we describe what happens in the phase 2 period?
Yeah, so I'll go back to the overall timeline. So there's going to be, once selected for phase 2, there's going to be 4 to 6 weeks of technical assistance. And the plan is to select up to 3 projects per supervisorial district to advance to phase 2. So when you're notified about phase 2, you will also be notified what district we're planning for your proposed project to be in. And then you'll go through this technical assistance phase where Genesis LA will support you to identify a qualifying property, to really refine your project proposal. You'll flesh out your budget, your financing plan, your tenant plan, and then you'll submit a phase 2 application at the end of that 4 to 6 week period. And then we'll evaluate those applications to choose at least 1 project per district. So that's 5 projects at a minimum. And that will be notified in the fall of 2026 with acquisitions starting in late 2026, early 2027.
Okay. If you're awarded CAF this year, is it possible to apply next year as well for additional funding?
I don't think that's allowable currently, meaning in the first round, those 7 winners are not eligible in this round. I don't know if we can speak to a future round that hasn't been approved or funded yet. but based on history, that hasn't been allowed.
Yeah, you are eligible if you're a secondary applicant. So if you got funding last round, but you want to play a secondary applicant role for a different application this round, you are eligible to apply. We envision that that will most likely apply only to developers who are looking to support another entity's project. But yeah, I don't think we know for sure about the next round.
Yeah, I don't think we know for sure about the next round. And I will say, as you all know, as business owners and folks leading these organizations, this is a large commitment to acquire a property. So, not to speak on behalf of our first round applicants, but I can't imagine that they're ready to jump right back into another property at this point. Many of them are still working through standing up their initial business and vision.
Okay. What type of oversight and compliance tools will be in place for those that are awarded?
Could you repeat the question, Darnell? Sorry.
Yeah. What type of oversight and compliance tools will be in place for those that are awarded?
So a few things. The covenant is recorded on the property, so the county would have, rights to remedy if you're not following the covenant's rules. And that does run with the land. So even if you sell it, the next buyer has to also comply with those rules. There's also quarterly progress reporting that is required through the point in time which the property is placed in service and is operational. And there'll be some ongoing support and resources that the county and Genesis will be able to provide in terms of technical assistance as you move forward with the project. I don't know if there's anything else to add, Sarah, Kristen, that you.
Oh, that sounds right.
How can we find of the available properties? And I think possible to note that there isn't a list of
Yeah.
property associated with the CAF.
Yeah, so there is no property list. It's on the applicant to look for properties, but at this point, it is not required to have a property. So it's much more about what is the type of property you're looking for and what project are you trying to execute on? What are you trying to create? And then in phase two, we'll provide technical assistance to help you look for a property that fits your vision if you're selected for phase two.
And I just want to add, there was a question about purchasing county-owned land and if it was eligible. And so kind of to Sarah's point, we don't have a list, but you're welcome to and encouraged to look at what's on the market currently, to approach owners as you see fit for properties that may be off market to gauge their interest in applying. And then for county-owned land, the disposition of county land does need to go through a process that's dictated by California state law. It can be rather lengthy. It does require a public and competitive process, and then there are other additional restrictions placed on any properties purchased from the county. So while the site itself may be eligible, it may be very difficult to purchase directly and certainly within the time frame that is expected through this funding source.
Can you have no experience as a primary applicant as long as you have a developer as your second applicant?
Yes. I think, yeah, you want to think about the collective experience of your team and then what you're trying to do. So if you have no to very limited experience, we recommend you describe a project that's very narrow in scope. Maybe you want to buy a move-in ready property that needs small tenant improvements. That would be kind of the natural next step of someone with very little real estate experience, little to no real estate experience. And then if you're trying to do a larger rehabilitation project or new construction project, you'll want either someone in your organization or your partner organization to have had that real estate experience, so that we can know that you'll be successful. So to answer that specific question, yes, you can apply with no experience. And we recommend if you're pursuing a more meaningful renovation that you have a partner that has experience.
For properties considered underutilized, Is there a minimum development threshold or required increase in use or density that the property must meet in order to qualify? For example, does there need to be a certain percentage increase in square footage, units, occupancy, or economic activity?
Yeah, I mean, Kristen, correct me if I'm wrong, but we are like talking to the county about this right now internally and finalizing this, but there is some flexibility. And we're going to work with the phase two applicants to work with them to make sure that their project is aligned with the goals and outcome goals of this program and that there is some revitalization component. But I think there is some flexibility around exactly how we.
Yeah, the expectation is not that you purchase an underutilized site, say in a TOD, and then max out the development with a high rise. So there's not a minimum, but we do want to, the intent is to see properties and land revitalized and increase what the contribution is to the neighborhood. And so, we'll look at the project vision and then through the phase two process, if that applicant is pre-qualified, then we will work through the specifics of what that project actually looks like.
Is there a preference given to consumer-facing uses such as restaurants, retail, versus business-to-business uses such as warehousing, services, manufacturing?
Yeah, I mean, we have defined community serving commercial tenants. So there is a preference for um, tenants that are serving the local community in some way.
We should say that serving the local community could also be in terms of job creation.
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be retail, but part of that vision is, if you are, I'm just trying to think of someone I spoke to recently, maybe not necessarily related to CAF, they were looking to um, build a chip manufacturing facility that had the potential to generate up to 50 jobs. Like that is not necessarily retail, but it is producing opportunity for the local community.
Yeah, and in this question about your leasing approach, we ask how you would find community serving tenants that meet the needs of the local community. We also ask about your tenant plan. And so this is where you could describe why you think your proposed tenants are community serving and kind of articulate the potential impacts, number of jobs created, number of small business spaces created, things like that. So it's really about how you're articulating that impact for the community, as Kristen said.
Is there a deadline to raise all the capital to acquire the property?
So sorry, I had a screen sharing issue. When and if you're selected for phase two, we will work with you to develop a feasible project timeline in that phase. And so there will be kind of goals and realistic deadlines around when you're expected to secure additional financing or complete the project, and that will be based on kind of the scope and details of your project. But there's not like a universal deadline for all applicants.
Yeah, I think particularly for the mixed use development, we understand that folks would probably be pursuing public subsidies, tax credits, things that have like sort of specific application rounds and time frames. So we would be considering that into what that deadline would look like.
Do you have any idea of how many applicants you anticipate?
Well,
Yeah.
there are over
Yeah.
300, we're over 350 folks on this call. So probably somewhere in the hundreds range.
I know that we're at time or almost at time. So I'll just transition, I think, to the wrap up and next steps, unless folks feel otherwise. But thank you all for your questions, for attending today. We're going to be tracking all of these. They're all in writing for a reason. So we're going to be tracking all of these and following up in our FAQs. Just as a reminder of the application timeline. So it was released May 5th. It's due June 30th. and selected applicants will be notified mid-August. So this is the timeline. If you have not already, we recommend going to our CAF website, opportunity.lacounty.gov/CAF, and signing up for updates. That's where you'll get notified when the FAQs are released and if there's any other info sessions. So we really recommend getting on our listserv for this program. And feel free to email us at this email address with additional questions that come up. We're available for the next 6 weeks before the application is due for these specific questions. And follow the Department of Economic Opportunity on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram for more updates about this program and also awesome other programs and resources for small businesses and nonprofits.